Doctor is supposed to save lives, but what happens when a doctor crosses a line so dark that the healer becomes the killer? He had medical knowledge, he had a respectable profession, and according to investigators and court records, he became involved in a horrifying criminal world where human lives were treated as commodities. He would eventually become known as Dr. Death. But the most disturbing question is not what he did, it is how a doctor transformed into a killer. This is the story of Devendra Sharma, who was born in Aligarh, had his medical education in Ayurveda, and practiced in the city chamber. Before we begin, please let us know in the comments where you are listening from. We would love to know how far this story has traveled, and if you enjoy real stories of crime, mystery, and the darker side of human nature, please subscribe to the channel, share this video, and stay with us until the end. Because today's story is about a man who began his life as a doctor, a profession built around saving lives. But somewhere along the way, everything changed. This is the disturbing journey of Devendra Sharma, the man who came to be known as Dr. Death. Before the name Dr. Death became associated with one of India's most notorious serial killers, Devendra Sharma was simply known as a doctor. He was from the Aligarh region of Uttar Pradesh, and his father worked for a pharmaceutical company in Siwan, Bihar. After completing his studies, Sharma obtained a Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery (BAMS) in Bihar in 1984. He then chose Rajasthan as the place where he would begin his professional life. He opened his own clinic, known as Janta Clinic, in Bandikwi, Rajasthan, and for the next 11 years he practiced as an Ayurvedic doctor. His family background was clean, like any normal middle-class family. He got married and had 2 sons who are doing well in their career. The horrific transformation of his psychology and mindset had no apparent clue in his lineage. He is an example of the result of nurturing negativity that directs your moves and controls your mind. For more than a decade, there was apparently little in his public life to suggest the horrifying transformation that would later take place. He had a medical qualification, a clinic, and a profession that was supposed to be built around helping people. He was married, had a family, and was living the life of an ordinary medical practitioner. But in 1994, something happened that would change the direction of his life. Sharma invested around 11 lakh rupees in what he believed was a gas dealership opportunity. The scheme turned out to be fraudulent, and he lost a substantial amount of money. That financial disaster is often described in police accounts and later reports as the turning point. But losing money does not turn an ordinary person into a killer. What happened next was a series of choices, each taking Sharma further away from the life he had built as a doctor. By 1995, according to police accounts, he had allegedly entered the world of crime, perhaps to recover his losses, or anger triggered in him led to his choosing crime, justifying his logic that crime is a part of our society. His downfall as a human being was the beginning of his huge loss of money with a fake gas agency. And then came something far more disturbing, his alleged involvement in an illegal kidney transplant network. This is where the story takes its first truly dark turn. A man who had studied medicine was now allegedly using his knowledge and contacts in a completely different world, one involving money, deception, and human organs. Police later said that between 1998 and 2004, Sharma helped arrange more than 125 illegal kidney transplants, acting as an intermediary and earning substantial amounts from each procedure. These figures come from police interrogation and media reports, so they should be understood as allegations and reported admissions rather than a precise, independently verified count. But the kidney racket was only part of the story. Somewhere during those years, Sharma's involvement in crime moved from exploiting desperate people for money to something much more sinister. He became connected with a group targeting taxi and truck drivers, and eventually the doctor who had once treated patients would become associated with murder. The transformation had begun,
But the kidney racket was only one part of the story. He tried to get a permit of a fake gas agency owner, but failed. Then he started innocent cab drivers to get their cars and then killing them. This gradually transformed him into a monstrous man. Is crime acts like ad fiction for more crimes? Does it make one feel powerful person of the underworld? According to police accounts, Sharma and his associates eventually began targeting taxi and truck drivers. The method was chillingly simple. A vehicle would be hired, the driver would be lured into a vulnerable situation, and the driver could then be overpowered and killed. The body would be disposed of while the vehicle became part of the criminal operation. These were not random acts of violence. They appeared calculated, organized, and driven by profit. And this is where the contrast becomes difficult to ignore. A man trained in medicine, whose profession was supposed to save lives, was now allegedly becoming involved in a network where human life had a price. As investigators began connecting disappearances and vehicles to the same criminal network, Sharma's name started appearing in connection with multiple murders. Later reports quoted police as saying that he confessed to involvement in more than 50 killings, although the exact number of victims remains disputed and only some cases resulted in convictions. That distinction is important, but even without accepting every allegation, the documented cases were horrifying enough. The man who had once treated patients was now being described by investigators as a cold and calculating killer. And then came the mistake that would finally bring the doctor into the sights of the police. The criminal network that had operated through secrecy and deception was beginning to unravel. Investigators were getting closer, and Sharma's carefully constructed world was starting to collapse. But catching him would prove much harder than identifying him, because before the police could close the net, Dr. Death was about to discover that prison was not necessarily the end of his story. But Sharma's medical knowledge allegedly made him different from an ordinary criminal. Investigators believed that he understood how to exploit people, how to remain inconspicuous, and how to avoid drawing attention. For years, the criminal operation continued. Then the pattern began to emerge. Missing drivers, stolen vehicles, and unexplained deaths started pointing investigators toward a network that was far larger than a single murder. Sharma was eventually arrested, and his name became associated with a series of killings. Media reports later began calling him Dr. Death. The investigation also exposed the extraordinary range of his alleged criminal activities: illegal kidney transplantation, vehicle theft, deception, and murder had apparently become interconnected parts of the same criminal world. Sharma was eventually convicted in several murder cases, while police accounts attributed many more killings to him. Yet the full number of victims remains uncertain. Some figures were based on alleged confessions and police claims rather than convictions. What is beyond dispute is that the authorities considered him extremely dangerous, a man capable of moving between different criminal activities while maintaining the outward appearance of an ordinary professional. Eventually, the doctor who had once walked freely through society found himself behind bars. For Sharma, prison should have been the end of the story. His movements were restricted, his identity was known, and the authorities had finally caught up with him. But years later, something extraordinary would happen, something that would allow Dr. Death to walk out of prison once again, and this time the police would lose him completely. When his family learned the truth. For the people closest to Devendra Sharma, the revelation must have been almost impossible to comprehend. The man they knew as a husband and father was now being identified by investigators as a convicted killer. The details emerging from the investigation were horrifying, murders, stolen vehicles, an illegal kidney racket, and allegations of many more victims. And according to police, the man at the center of it all was someone who had once lived an apparently ordinary family life. The system gave him another chance. There is another uncomfortable question in the story of Devendra Sharma. Not about the killer himself, but about the system that eventually allowed him to walk out of prison. In 2023, Sharma was granted parole. He was supposed to return to prison when the period ended. Instead, he disappeared. For a man with convictions for murder and a long criminal history, this raises a difficult question. How carefully should such a prisoner be monitored when he is temporarily released? The decision may have followed the rules applicable at the time, but the consequences of losing track of him were challenging for the police. And Sharma did not simply vanish into the wilderness. According to reports, he eventually reinvented himself as a religious figure at an ashram in Rajasthan. The man who had once been known as Dr. Death was now presenting himself to ordinary people in the completely different role of a holy man. That transformation is deeply disturbing because it reveals another side of his criminal personality: deception. He was not merely accused and convicted of killing. His criminal history also involved fraud, manipulation, and the exploitation of people's trust. Eventually, investigators received information that Sharma was hiding in an ashram in Dausa, Rajasthan. But there was a problem. Simply walking into the ashram and asking for him could have alerted the fugitive. So the police adopted a remarkable strategy. Officers reportedly posed as his followers and gradually moved closer to him. They had to be certain that the man inside the ashram was actually the fugitive they had been searching for. For a man who had already escaped once, one mistake could have allowed him to disappear again. And then came the moment of recognition. The religious disguise could no longer protect him. The man sitting among devotees was identified as Devendra Sharma, the convicted killer who had been missing for nearly 2 years. On that Monday in May 2025, the search finally ended. Police arrested him from the Dausa ashram and brought the fugitive back into custody. Reports said he had been living there as a priest and, according to Hindustan Times, was even treating devotees for ailments. Think about the extraordinary sequence of identities: doctor, criminal, convicted killer, prisoner, fugitive, and finally, priest. Each identity seemed to belong to a different man, but behind them was the same person. And that brings us to perhaps the most disturbing question of the entire story. Was this simply a desperate attempt to hide from the law? Or does it reveal something deeper about a man capable of repeatedly reinventing himself to manipulate the people around him? Devendra Sharma's story is not simply the story of a doctor who became a killer. It is a story about trust, deception, greed, and the frightening ability of a human being to cross one moral boundary after another. A man who once entered the medical profession to treat people eventually became associated with murder, criminal networks, and the exploitation of those who trusted him. And even after imprisonment, he managed to disappear and create another identity for himself. Perhaps the most disturbing lesson is that appearances can be deeply deceptive. A respectable profession does not guarantee a respectable character, and a religious appearance does not necessarily reveal the person underneath. The law eventually caught up with Devendra Sharma again, but the questions raised by his story remain. When does a person stop seeing another human being as a human being? And how does someone cross that line again and again without turning back? We may never know exactly what happened inside his mind, but his story leaves us with one uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most frightening criminals are not the ones who look like monsters. They are the ones who learn how to look ordinary. The court's verdict. Eventually, the allegations became courtroom evidence. Devendra Sharma was tried in several murder cases
and the courts found him guilty in 7 cases involving the kidnapping and murder of taxi drivers between 2002 and 2004. For these crimes, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. That distinction is important when we tell this story. Police and media reports have attributed many more killings to Sharma, including claims of more than 50 victims. But those numbers should not be presented as though every death was proved in court. What we know with certainty is that Sharma was convicted in multiple murder cases and received life sentences. The rest belongs to the category of police allegations, reported confessions, and unresolved claims.